So Chiquimula, like Guatemala City, all of the streets are paved, and none of the buildings are very tall because there was a big earthquake in like, I feel really bad if I get the date wrong, but it was like 1978, I think, that completely leveled the city. So if you see anything taller than 3 floors, you know that it was constructed in that time since 1978. But most buildings are only like 1 or 2 stories tall. And the way that it is like, it's just kind of like a wall, and then there are doors in the wall leading into like people's houses. So it's not like individual houses. Like for them, it's weird to see a movie like in the States where you have a neighborhood where it's like a house, lawn, a house, like grass and plants and stuff. So like, that is weird. Because all of the houses are essentially like one giant house, but they're split into, like each one has their own like little mini driveway if they have a car and stuff like that. So that's kind of what it was like. And it was sort of like that in Chiquimula, but Chiquimula is in the desert. So you see a lot of like cowboys, essentially, which you wouldn't think that you would see in Guatemala, but they're in Chiquimula. And so like they have the hats and the collared shirts and the big belt buckles and the pants and like boots and everything, but instead of having like a gun in the holster, they have like a machete. Yeah. And I mean, not that they ever did anything. Like I remember once I saw this old man and he was adorable, and he had harvested, I think, just like jalapeno peppers at his house, and he like brought this box of peppers, and he was just sitting on the bus and he had his little machete, and he was so cute. He's like old and wrinkly, and I was just like, that is like the epitome of Chiquimula right there. But yeah, it was a lot hotter in Chiquimula as well. My entire mission was really, really hot, and you just kind of sweat all the time. But yeah, Chiquimula was just a little bit different. The streets were more, you would find dirt roads in some areas, but they would be made out of like paving stones in like more towards the central area of the city. But like the way Chiquimula works is there's the main city, and then they had what they would call aldeas. And so you could take like a little 5-minute bus ride, and like I said, those like mini buses, right? So like essentially a van. It's not really a bus. Like there's a little van. And sometimes people are like standing in the doorway and like holding in, and they're like sticking their entire body out the door, and you're like, ah! I may or may not have done that once. I didn't do it again though, because I was like, what if I let go on accident? And so you'd ride in a little bus, and like a 10-minute bus ride, and you'd go out to like a group of houses, like it's almost like a little neighborhood. And then you could go across the way and there's another one, or you could go like 15 minutes more and there was another one. And they could take the bus into Chiquimula, where you had like stores and things that they could shop at. You had like your nicer grocery stores that felt a little bit more like, not quite like a Smith's, right? But a little bit nicer, And then you had your other stores where like, okay. But things are cheaper there, so we usually shop there. And like one thing that was really interesting, they don't have milk in like jugs and refrigerated like we do. They put it through a heat treatment, I guess, and so they sell their milk in like cardboard boxes on a shelf. So it's a little different, but yeah, so just like little things like that. But Chiquimula was great. I feel like generally, people were a little bit poorer outside of the capital city than they were inside Guatemala City, but relative, it's like rural, not poverty, but like rural versus urban. It's going to look a little bit different. The way that houses are constructed in Chiquimula is a little bit different. They're a lot more open. So you walk in like the front door, but like instead of having a wall where normally like we would have our dining room like enclosed, for example, there is no wall. So it's like you just kind of like walk in, or like they'd have a couch and it would be like where their TV is, but like you're sitting there on the couch and there's no wall, and it's just like out onto a patio and onto the street and everything. Not the street, but like inside, because they have like a big wall around like their property, and then their house is in part of it, and it's not all closed off like behind doors, Like you could go in the kitchen and close the door so the kitchen could be totally enclosed. But like the dining room table, it's under a roof, but it's open. So that there's a lot just more breeze and just like air passing through. But that can be a little tricky in rainy season. So they like push everything in a little bit so it doesn't get soaking wet when it rains outside. But yeah, so just a lot more like open and airy and breezy just because it's so hot. And they don't have air conditioning at all. Like even the richest of the rich don't really have air conditioning or heating in their homes because that's just not a design that they have. So yeah, that was a little bit different in Chiquimula, is the style of the houses. And a lot more dirt roads and more like rural, you know, a lot more people that had their houses constructed with like sticks and mud and a black plastic sheet for the roof, you know. So a lot more of that than you would find obviously in like Guatemala City. The area that was a lot richer, they actually had like gated communities. And so we couldn't always get in everywhere. Like some areas they were like, no, you need to have a specific appointment with like a specific family that you're going to see in order for us to get back in there. And so members would always be like, oh, you can say you're coming visiting us, you know. So we didn't really have a problem with that. But they would have like their doorbell, you'd like ring the doorbell, and a lot of them had cameras so they could see who you were. Whereas like, you know, in other areas, all you're doing is like wrapping your ring on their metal door so that they hear you when they're back across their little lot on the other side. So I would say generally more receptive outside in the departments. But in general, everybody, essentially everybody believes in God, which is wonderful. Like that is one of my favorite things about Guatemalan people, is that everybody believes in God and everybody knows that God exists and that he loves them. And they maybe don't understand who he is exactly. Like a lot of them would just be like, oh yeah, God, like he created me. God, he loves me. But a lot more of not quite the grasp, I feel, that we have of like understanding like he's literally our spiritual father, and understanding that like he has a body of flesh and bones. So like a lot of them like believed in God and like believed in Jesus Christ, but they didn't quite understand exactly what that meant. But it was really wonderful because that made them so receptive to listen. And even if they didn't like keep going, and maybe for them they were like, oh wait, Joseph Smith, like I don't know about this, or you know, different things, or like, oh, I've already been baptized. That was something that was really tricky, is they're like, oh no, I've been baptized already, I'm good, don't worry about me. You know, and you're like, well, but you need to be baptized again. But yeah, I'd say generally more receptive. But then I compare my mission with like one of my friends served in Denmark. And so like comparing our receptive levels, I'm like, oh yeah, even in my most difficult areas, like they were more receptive than they are in other areas of the world. So culturally and just like generally, they're very warm and loving people, and they'll let you in and let you talk to them. They may not want you to come back, but they'll let you talk to them for a little while. So pretty receptive. They're great.